What's going on, everyone? My name is Bert.
And I'm Fonz.
And this is
Bert and Fonz.
Now, one thing that I know that we wanted to talk about today was this whole concept of like human association and a common thread that kind of carries through almost everything in life, whether that be friendships or marriages or business, like just this idea that it kind of carries through everything. What do you...
So, yeah, we were talking about this earlier.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we were just talking about how every human association has this element of partnership, obviously, whereby there's a value that's being transacted. So even if it's friendship, you know, the value might be stroking somebody's ego or protecting yourself, or like common taste, so you have fun or you validate each other's opinions, that kind of stuff. It happens with marriage too, and I think marriage is the one entity where people get more spiky in Western civilization if you remind them that
What
it's
do you mean,
business.
spiky?
Well, because if you tell them marriage is a business proposition, a lot of people kind of feel like the product, you know, or...
Right. It feels like it takes the romance out of it, right?
Yeah, right, exactly. I think that's probably why we have such a high divorce rate, you know, and they do tell in Asian countries where they do prearranged marriages and we kind of like look down on it because it's kind of forced on people.
Well, and it's just such a foreign concept, especially, you know, like somebody who grew up here in the United States, like that just feels so
to me too
different.
Well, to me it just feels I don't think anybody should be forced on prearranged marriage, but what I'm saying is kind of we underestimate also that they're also taking the cold look at it and like, are we going to get people that are more compatible with each other, so they're going to play out their partnership longer in life instead of like burning out with one another when the thrill is gone, you know? And like I said, I saw that in an interview once, and it shocked me at first because I got married for romance. But probably had I known, you know, what I know now, maybe I would have been a little bit colder about like calculating what all the factors involved were. I mean, I wouldn't change it for the world because I have a lovely daughter out of it.
Right.
But it wasn't fun. And these guys did say, I think it was an Indian lady was talking. She was saying, you know, we have a lower incidence of divorce.
Yeah.
Because love can dissipate, but friendship can strengthen with people that are compatible.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah.
And we think about it in business a lot. We don't think about it in marriages or in friendships even, you know.
Right. And I think a lot of that just stems from the fact that in a business setting, like that's the only thing we're really forced to think about. And we take it almost for granted anywhere else in our life. Like we don't really think about it.
Right. But if you think about it, like you and I wouldn't be friends if we didn't get something from the other one.
Right.
You know, and sure, we can make it, you know, it's friendship, we like each other, but we have common tastes, we have things that we're interested in, you know.
So that's the whole reason we wanted to start doing this podcast.
I think people would be a lot better off if we were thinking about the fact that this is an operation and it needs to work. Yeah,
that makes sense. So are you saying that, you know, I'm just about to turn 30. I mean, I haven't been married yet, but there's hope for me still to have a strong marriage if I just take this into consideration with whomever it happens to be.
I would actually say that it would be my hope that there's even more hope for you now that you know the cold truth. I mean,
I'm woke to the truth.
That's right. And I actually, you know what? Here's the thing. I do think there's a lot of people that are more hip to that notion.
Sure.
I think there's an awful lot of us that are not, because we get all this romance, and romance is good. I mean, don't get me wrong. I like that. I like chemistry a lot. Mm-hmm. I like personal chemistry. I like personal chemistry in my relationships. You know, I like.
Who doesn't like personal chemistry?
Right. I don't know. There's enough for everything, but right. But I mean, hey, don't you think it's?
No, I agree, and I think especially, if you're taking this to a degree where you're like thinking about it not as a business proposition, but it like solely based off of romance, right? And you have that initial spark, you have that connection, everything just kind of clicks into place, it feels great. And then over time, that just sort of dwindles. Like, you get to know each other, and it's exciting at first, but then you sort of like figure each other out. And there's not like, you look at across the table and you're like, I already know everything there is. Well, but so how do you keep that kind of going?
But my point is, like, and we confuse this with chemistry too, and I guess they're related. But you know, there's nothing wrong with figuring somebody out. The problem is if you figure the problem. I knew somebody whose parents I met once, and she told me, she said they hate one another. but they have nowhere else to go. And I was like, really,
so
that
they
much?
Felt like stuck in that?
Very much so. But
okay.
and I don't think that's uncommon. But what she said that really hit me was, I said, how did they ever get to this? And she said they had a ton of sexual chemistry. When that went away, they discovered they had nothing to tell each other.
Sure.
And that really just hit me. I was like, so they hadn't bothered to find out, just the sexual chemistry was so good, which, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But they hadn't bothered to find out all the other stuff that actually plays a lot. Once you think about it, it's super obvious.
Right.
In the longevity of a long-term relationship, right?
Right. There's the other forms of compatibility beyond all of that.
Right.
And I mean, so if we were going to translate that into business now, let's just say, when you're working in a good business partnership, there has to be that chemistry is a piece of it. Mm-hmm. Like the two people have to get along. But what would you say are some of the other factors of that really need to mesh? Because for me personally, a lot of it is personality type. And the fact that you can relate to one another and feel comfortable around each other.
That's exactly okay, but that's more about than personality type. So how fast does somebody else understand you?
Right.
How long does it take you guys to get to a quorum, to get to an agreement?
Right.
When you have a disagreement, how fast or how well do you negotiate that disagreement? All that stuff.
And the communication associated with that.
Right.
And, whether or not there's good communication even between the two people.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. And we bucket that on chemistry, and we leave it at such broad strokes. Mm-hmm. I think with business, now that you bring that up, with business, we're a lot colder about that. We do think I don't get along. I like this guy, but I argue with him a lot, so I'm not going to go into a long-term partnership. We think about it a lot more cold or colder than when we're getting into somebody, she's really attractive, my parents are going to really like, you know what I mean? You get a lot.
Right.
You're not thinking about the other stuff that's a lot more in my opinion, but we don't think about it as hard. And again, I do think that there are people that think it through. I don't think it's my case, and the majority of the people that I've met don't do that much. Although I do have friends that are in long-term committed relationships that have been very successful. I do.
Right.
Some of which have surprised me.
You're like, these two, really?
Yeah. Me and everybody else. I was like, wow. But I guess they were compatible, and we just didn't know.
Right.
So it just takes all kinds. Like I said, it's not that it's business, and that's why I think people get spiky when you bring up the marriage.
That makes sense.
It's a partnership,
and I think that's the key terminology to that, is that it's about forming that partnership, that real kind of bond between the two people. And it's not, let me rephrase this. So I think that a lot of people don't understand that partnership is also a key to a lot of these other associations throughout life, whether it be marriage or friendships or business. I mean, there's all different types that we can associate it to. Now, there's one in particular that I think is more relevant to you specifically than it would be to maybe a couple other folks, but that's specifically with bands. And I know that you've been in bands for a long period of time and have had to go through these struggles with, different bandmates or just figuring stuff out. Tell me a little more about what that association is like between you and bands and the bands that you've been in, because it's been 20 years now that you've been doing.
I haven't done it in a while, but I did it for 20 years. No, you're absolutely right. That's actually spot on. And your question is, how is that different? And my answer is it is not. It's the same thing. It's there's a partnership component.
Right.
There's an operation that has to be successful, and you with bands. So there's bands that have a ton of chemistry, but then don't work out because the partnership chemistry isn't there. I don't know how to explain. So there's musical chemistry. I guess that's what I should say.
Musical chemistry is a big one, yeah.
So there's musical chemistry, like this band. So I had one band. I'm not going to mention their name because they don't deserve it, and screw them. But it was a great band, and we did a lot of good stuff.
To that band, cheers.
Yes. But, so I'm going to make a comparison to one that's well-known and that has a similar trait that I've heard of. That would be Minor Threat.
Minor Threat, okay.
Yeah, so Minor Threat is a seminal hardcore punk band, and they were great. But their members didn't get along well. I was going to say component because that's what we say in Spanish, but their members didn't get along well. I don't know. Another one that comes to mind is the Eagles. the first formation of the Eagles was one that I really liked because they were all singer-songwriters, every single last one of them.
Right.
And they wanted to do it on equal terms. They wanted to do like everybody makes a song and then everybody else just like. But then there was this big excision between Don Henley and Glenn Frey against Bernie Lennon and Randy, and then later Don. So they just, and that it's too bad because their musical chemistry was really good, but their personal chemistry was really bad. There's other bands where maybe the music isn't as brilliant, but the friendship is really good. And I think that a perfect example that I can think of right now of a very well-known band that is perfect.
Like still together and still does all this stuff.
No, not still together, but legendary in how they got along, even when they didn't get on.
Sure.
Would be the Beatles.
Okay.
So Yeah,
tell me more about that.
So a great example is their drummer. They just kept looking until they found Ringo Starr. And there's a famous fiasco where they didn't really handle, to their own reckoning, the sacking of Pete Best all that good. Mm-hmm. They weren't very elegant about that. But the truth is, they did want a certain drummer, and once they got it, everything clicked.
Right.
And even when they got split up because they ended up kind of tired of the Beatle thing, and they kind of had a couple of feuds amongst themselves, they still kind of went back. So there was this chemistry. They would go back. You would see them in interviews going. So famously, John Lennon and Paul McCartney wrote a couple of songs like dinging each other. Mm-hmm. And then they would be interviewed, like the press was just trying to dig for blood.
Yeah.
And they'd be like, no, I love Paul. They would just always end up and they genuinely...
So they would be like, here's my grievance, and they would try to dig into it. They're like, no, don't get me wrong. Like, I really do have great appreciation, respect for this individual.
Right. Well, and they love each other. They're friends. They're never going to stop. Another one that I saw, I think, was a press round with the Police 10 years ago, I think.
Really?
If you guys know the Police.
The band, the Police. Yeah.
And these guys have been through hell and back with each other.
Yeah.
They're three big egos, especially the drummer and the bass player.
Right.
Sting and Stuart Copeland.
Right.
But, Andy Summers is a huge person. And you can tell that they get on each other's nerves, like a long-term marriage. They do get on each other's nerves. And they even released, I think they did a reunion after a bunch of years, and they released the rehearsals and how they bitch at each other in the rehearsals. It's really funny.
That's going to be fucking cover of Modern Drummer magazine is going to be fucking devoted to that drum.
But then they're in the press conference and they're going like, I'm always going to be in the band with these two guys, whether I want to or not. Right. These guys are my band, and and they kind of love each other. And the same was true with the Beatles. It's not true with other bands. Like you see Don Henley, and he never mentions, Don Felder, or, he just never talked about it.
Would you say that holds true or untrue for your past band experiences?
Well, it depends on the band. It holds very true with a couple of them, yeah.
But do you feel like there was definitely those connections where you felt like, okay, this whole partnership just works well with these individuals? Like, are there still members of those bands in the past where you're like, this person, like, I'm always going to be in a band with them, essentially?
Oh, absolutely. There's
right.
In fact, there is one band, and I have a band now with some friends that when I go back to Spain,
right,
we'll get together and we'll do stuff every once in a while. And they have their own band, so they're musicians in other bands, but they have done me the honor of making a little band for me for when I go there. And then
sort of like an invitation back to, like, when you come back, this is always something we're going to do.
They're my band, and I can play with them anytime. And
that's awesome.
They're younger. That's awesome. Really cool. But just to answer your question, like, when I was young, I had no clue about any of this. Mm-hmm. And that goes back to the marriage thing, too. I just didn't know. I was going for friendship and chemistry.
Right.
So when there was treason or betrayal, which happens in human relationships, when there was envy or crap like that, I just handled it poorly.
Right.
We all did. And I'm conscious about it now. So there's one band in particular that we used to play, we play like old rock and rhythm and blues ballads.
Blues really?
Ballads, blues standards, sorry. Yeah, blues stuff, yeah, a lot.
Okay.
And those guys will always be my band. They also happen to be my friend in other aspects of life. So it's great to go.
Those connections have carried on beyond band.
Yeah, and not only that. So that's why I was kind of trying to answer your question with that, because we used to fight more when we were younger. But now as older guys, we come back and it's great because like the rehearsals are a lot more, we focus on the music a lot more. There's no feuds. There's no ego friction. There's a lot of joking going on, so it's kind of cool. It's a lot healthier.
Right.
So you can tell the wisdom of the human relationships is finally clicked, you know? Because back then we were friends. Like, that band, we used to be together in the 90s. And we were really good friends, but we would fight a lot. Mm-hmm. A lot, you know? And now it's like, you know, we just joke around in the rehearsing room and we just have a lot of fun. So I think you learn over time.
Well, that's good to know. I mean, I feel like I have a lot of learning left to do still on a couple of those things, but it's good to know, like, I think...
I mean, I still do too. Just so, you know, let's be fair here.
Right. But my own kind of, like, spin on that personally is just that, you know, I've been in bands, but it was like school bands or anything. I never had like a band or anything.
Hold on a second. You're a real musician, though.
I am, but
because I played in bands for like years and stuff. But you've studied and you have a.
I did. Yes,
training.
I had some formal training back in the day. But before we get to that, there's one other thing I want to talk about, and that was just like my own association with all of this stuff.
Okay.
And I mean, the only thing that I can relate to that honestly is with college for me. Mm-hmm. Like, and those friendships and people that I met during college, like a lot of that seemed, there was a lot of competition and everything, and then you develop some of those friendships, and then, you know, I'm sure anyone who has, you know, gone to college or high school or anything else, so you have like these friends where you're like, no, we're totally going to meet up after this, you know, we're totally going to get together. Right. And then you just never hear from them again.
Right.
Because people get busy and stuff dissipates.
That never changes.
No, that never changes.
Again. That
As I'm also learning professionally with a lot of like jobs now, like, you know, you leave a job,
don't
people
be a
leave.
stranger. You know, stay in touch. Oh, for sure.
But I will say that there's been a lot of, like, there's just a very few core people, even from that time in college, that I will still get together with, and we'll still hang out and still chat and have a great time. But it's because we sort of figured it out then, but we didn't realize we had figured it out until much later in life now, where we get back and we're like, you know what? Like, I'm really glad that we had these agreements and we saw eye to eye back then, because now we can actually get together and do more meaningful stuff as opposed to like the competition or the bickering or the whatever. Like,
nice. So so you're really bringing it back to, actually, I think that is the famous compatibility we're talking about, right?
Exactly.
So that's kind of how that endures. That's how you see. You know, you're right. There's some friends that I have from decades ago. And some of them, if we just manage to hook up one of the times I go back to Spain, for example, it's like we just, you know, the sentence, you pick up right where you left off. You actually do.
Right.
And that's I think that's kind of how life tells you that, you know. That
exactly. I mean, I have friends in Sweden right now that I get to see them once a year if I'm lucky, just because it's not exactly cheap to go from here to Sweden or anywhere else in the world. But yeah, we definitely have those moments where it just like it picks right back up where it left off, and it was like we hadn't spent any time apart, but yet there's so much we have to catch up on.
Right. Well, and it's funny because now you mentioned this, when I go to Spain, so I'm from Spain, I live here, but I go to Spain periodically, and there's some friends that never, ever, ever hang out until I show up.
Right.
And then they use me as an excuse to see one another. So sometimes I got to tell them, hey, I don't care. Mm-hmm. Like, you guys can meet up when I'm not here. So cut it out, because they try to, you know, use that time. But let me bring you back to the trumpet. He's a trumpet player. So he's telling me about, you know, all my band stuff. But you're actually a real musician. And in fact, you have
real is you know, up to interpretation.
As in, you've been taught music theory. You know how to read music, like all the stuff that now I have to go to YouTube to your tutorials to learn. You kind of know that. And not only that, I just want to say that I envy you a lot, because you also have a father who is, I would have given anything for having an artist father, because, you know, I've been artistic later in life. But tell me about your experience as a trumpet player and as a musician that knows, you know, did you play in bands or
I did. So I grew up in a household that actually, both of my parents, like you were saying, both of my parents actually played trumpet. And they were both musically inclined, and they both, you know, had been doing this for years and years and years. And so by the time I came around, that was just part of their normal routine. And so they would take me as a kid to go to rehearsals, and I was just always exposed to it and getting to see them perform and everything. And
how young were you when you started doing that?
When I started going to their performances?
Yeah, or even watching them rehearse. And
if they couldn't find a babysitter, I was there.
So from the get-go, that's awesome.
The very beginning.
Yeah.
They'd have to practice and everything, so there'd be times where I just hear them like off in the garage or wherever, and they're practicing their stuff, and I'm getting to hear like the routine and the working through of it. So I got exposure to that really, really early in life. And when I got to a certain age and I got into, I believe it was middle school, or like the ages, like grades 6 through 8 or whatever it was. And that was when I got to start being in band. And so it was like, all right, well, you're in band now. What do you want to play? Obviously, I wanted to play trumpet. I wanted to be like my parents. So I wanted to play trumpet.
Right.
And so I, picked up trumpet and started.
I didn't want to be
that.
like my parents. Okay, no, but sorry. Yeah,
that's a story for another time.
I just couldn't let that pass out.
Right. But no, I definitely wanted to. I just grew up with it, so I wanted to play too. And plus, it helped that my dad was actually like the predominant trumpet coach for the entire town that I was growing up in.
Oh, nice.
So like he was the guy that people called up like, hey, can you teach my kid how to play trumpet? I mean,
so people weren't surprised that you played trumpet.
I think it was almost expected. Like there was almost,
right.
And I think I can't think of a better way to say this, but because of what my dad was and people knew him of, especially anyone who was in the town, in that community, it was almost like a legacy thing. Like if I didn't play trumpet, it was going to be weird.
Mm-hmm.
And if I wasn't good at it, then it was going to be weird because he was also the trumpet teacher. That was not always the case. But I practiced, I tried to get there, but there was, when I got to that time of rebellious teen, there were definitely times like, are you practicing like I told you to? Yeah, totally. I didn't.
Right.
Sorry, Dad. I didn't practice as much as I should have. But no, there were definitely some really good moments with that.
So let me ask you this. Did you ever get like that callus that Louis Armstrong was famous for having on the upper lip? Like, do you get that? Is that something all the trumpet players get? Or
I mean, I'm sure that all trumpet players could get that over time, and that's mostly just due to the pressure that you're putting on your upper lip. And a lot of that comes from trying to get like upper register stuff, where you need to have like a lot of force behind everything that you're doing and just try and get as much power into that horn as you can.
Wow.
And so I never personally got that. I mean, I had practiced enough to get a decent upper register. In fact, there was actually one time, this is like my all-time favorite moment of playing trumpet. And, I haven't played trumpet in a long time, regrettably. Probably something I should get back into at some point, just because, I want to reconnect with it. But one of my favorite moments playing trumpet, and this is something that has stayed with me for years and years and years, and to the point where when I think about it, and if I could ever find the recording again, I would listen to it. But
you have that recorded?
It's recorded somewhere. It is documented.
Some big feat music.
On
that's
tape.
awesome. Yeah.
And it exists somewhere. It may be at my dad's house somewhere.
Okay.
But it's like an unmarked VHS tape of this competition we went to, because I was in jazz band in high school.
Okay.
And part of that was going to do these competitions, and there was one that we went to. I don't remember the school that it was, but I remember one of the songs that we were playing lead trumpet. There was an opportunity to, if you could do it, and nobody expected it at this junior level, but if you could do it, there was an opportunity to play this one part an octave higher, so an entire octave higher. Funny story is that it's actually written an octave lower.
Okay.
But that's because this rendition was written for players of a kind of a lower level.
Learners.
Exactly.
Students. Okay.
And so I know that leading up to this, there had been many times where me and my fellow first trumpet player, we had like tried, because we were practicing. We were hotheads. We wanted to do it. Mm-hmm. And we were trying to do it. And every time we would try to do it in band practice, it just... it would just sound horrible.
Okay.
So we were actually told to not do it.
That's what I was going to say.
Right.
That's what I would expect the teacher or
Yeah. Simon Austin, who was my trumpet teacher all through high school, he actually like pretty much straight up told us, like, just don't even try. Like, we want this to sound good, And the last thing we want is for that to come out during the because it's a competition, you know?
Right.
We don't want that to happen.
You don't want to risk it.
But being the hothead that I was, and feeling like because of my dad and just, I felt like I had something I needed to prove.
Yeah,
I had to try. I had to try. And so I had to, like, when the time came, I looked at my, my partner. I was like, I gave him the eye. I was like, I'm going to do it. And he's like, no, don't do it. I was like, no, I'm going to do it. And the time comes, and I just suck in as much air as I possibly can. And I basically have to, like, just force everything I had into this one thing. And the note comes, and it's the build up. Do. Woo! And I just nailed it.
Oh, wow.
I absolutely nailed it. There's like paint peeling off the walls because I just bam nailed this thing, and it was the only time the entire time I was underneath Simon Austin and teaching me that he, like, as he was directing, looks directly at me and like raises an eyebrow, gives a little nod, and keeps going. Nice. And that was to this day, one of my proudest moments of doing it, because I was like, no, I'm going to do it. And it was just like all the energy and excitement and just really trying to make that happen. But man, was I tired afterwards.
That sounds like a Mr. Miyagi moment right there.
How so?
Did you see The Karate Kid?
Oh, I saw The Karate Kid.
Do you remember when he goes for the, what do you call, like
the crank? Or the crane kick, yeah.
Yeah. And he looks at Miyagi, and Miyagi just nods like go for it.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what it reminded me of. I just saw like a little animated gif of Mr. Miyagi going,
Yeah.
Nice. So let me ask you this. When you hit a note like that, is it true, like, where do you get that strength? Where do you get all that air? Is it from your diaphragm?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So I was always taught that in order to get that power, that it comes from the diaphragm specifically. So, like, when you're drawing in air, I was always told to imagine like you're filling up your stomach first with air before you fill up your lungs. So you're just pulling it down and you're trying to fill up your entire chest cavity. And then you're just using your diaphragm to, like, really squeeze that and pressurize it essentially and force that out.
Okay. Nice.
That's what I was always taught. Anyway.
Okay. So I got a story for you.
Do you?
Yes. You know Dizzy Gillespie, right?
I do know Dizzy, yeah.
So he's still influential. I mean, well, I guess when you were starting, he was.
Oh, absolutely. He was definitely, like, if you want to know good jazz trumpet playing, listen to Dizzy. Listen to, like, a couple of other artists, but yes, he was definitely brought up.
The father of bebop.
Yeah.
The guy with the trumpet. Yeah. Was he's the one that has a horn that, like, just shoots up like that, right?
Yeah, he had the bent bell at the end.
Right. And he was notorious for his cheeks. If you guys are familiar with jazz, or if you're not, he's like the one trumpet player that has his cheeks balloon, like literally balloon over there. They just like grow enormously.
Oh, it's true. He's like a pufferfish.
Yeah, it's like a pufferfish.
But only right here in the face.
What's that other bird that it's like a pelican? They just have like their
like the big gullet thing?
Yeah. So something like that. And I would have sworn I did not dream this. So I saw this interview with Dizzy Gillespie in Spanish television in the late 70s when I was a kid.
Are you sure you saw this? Or?
Well, I've never seen. So here's the thing: I've never seen it again. I haven't seen it on YouTube or on the internet or anything. But I would have sworn I watched this interview with Dizzy Gillespie where they asked him about his famous cheeks puffing up. Yeah, and they were asking him, Mr. Gillespie. And I had to strain my ears because there was like a voiceover in Spanish translating. Okay. And I wanted to hear Diz actually say
his actual words to it. Yeah.
So I was kind of straining underneath, but he really did say, they asked him, is it true that you get your air from the diaphragm? So where do you get all that air that all of a sudden transforms your face and pretty much doubles its size? And Dizzy said, says it's not about the diaphragm at all. It's about something that most people don't think of. He says, I get my strength like everybody else does from the asshole. He said that. He said that.
Did I hear this correct? It's from the asshole?
I don't know if he said the butthole but he did. He was talking about, he was talking about the bottom sphincter. And no, seriously. And of course, the interviewer in Spain was, this is Spain, like we don't bleep out swear words, so you can actually talk like that. No, but he was shocked not because he said that word, but because of, it seemed preposterous. And he looked at him stunned, and Dizzy continued to explain, well, think about it. What is the first thing you do when you kneel to pick up a heavy weight from the floor? Mm-hmm. You tighten up your asshole.
I guess that makes a lot of damn sense.
Well, yeah, and I was totally stunned listening to this. I was going like, I can't believe you said that. And of course, then he goes over to say that how his wife just, started yelling at him when he got back home. He said, the one time you're on TV and you have, he says, well, it's true. So I just wanted to ask you, the story is great. I haven't seen this ever. I've been, just looking through YouTube, Vimeo, what have you. Never seen it again. I don't know if this was just recorded in that Spanish show. He was in Spain for the Victoria Jazz Fest or one of those.
Sure, yeah.
I don't know if just, the archives weren't kept or something, but I would have sworn I saw this. And I thought it was great because I love Dizzy Gillespie and I just love his deadpan humor. And I thought that was fantastic. He was really old then.
Yeah, for sure.
And he was just really funny. And I just thought it was a great story. And I wanted to ask you, what do you feel about that? Like when you think about playing the trumpet, like is that... Even though they told you had to fill in your stomach, do you think there's something there?
If I had to, so if I go back to that story I was telling about playing that note, I would say that probably I had to really pucker up down below before I could pucker up here to just throw that one out there.
I bet you that octave that you hit on that, had to do something with the bottom button,
the bottom button?
Yeah. I mean, come on.
I'm pretty sure I was turning coal to diamonds down there, but yeah, you know what I mean.
Well, because otherwise you can't do. Force has to come from somewhere.
Right.
If you become a bazooka, then you can't. There's not not much you can project up front.
Let's stuff that analogy right there.
I'm sorry. I just hey, once you open that Pandora box, I think
you're not wrong.
Everything goes. So, but anyway, I would have sworn Dizzy Gillespie said this on Spanish television in the late '70s, and I did not smoke pot then. I was barely 13.
Right.
So, and I remember being in...
So theoretically, it exists out there in the world somewhere.
I wouldn't pass... Yeah, and then I thought about it because I didn't find it later in the internet, and I was thinking maybe I did imagine it, and I just... It kind of seems like something Dizzy would say anyway, so it just, Do
you remember who was interviewing him?
Yeah. I remember his name right now, but I know who he is, and he's a famous Spanish DJ at the time.
Okay.
There was 3 progressive Spanish DJs in the late 70s. So this is, during at the end of Franco's dictatorship. So talking about jazz, hip jazz, and rock and roll was kind of new and crazy. And there was only 3 DJs that did this seriously.
Right.
And they would bring, somebody that interviews Dizzy Gillespie on television is not just any music DJ, especially back in that day. So I know exactly who it was.
So do you think that was, listening to all of this, was that even a source of inspiration for you back then? Because it sounds like this was before you really got into all your music stuff. But, not far before, but before all of that, do you think that this story at all, or just anything like that, just knowing about jazz, served as sort of an inspiration to help get you more motivated into it? Or
I think...
or maybe even in hindsight?
I think I was... Well, that's a good question. I think I was already inspired to want to do music. That's why I was watching that particular show, because it was the only one show in Spanish television, in all Spanish television, that had any music of weight, let's call it. And I actually remember the name of the show. It's called Musical Express, which is spelled exactly the same in Spanish as in English, so I can pronounce it in English, and but it's also in Spanish. It also means exactly that, Musical Express. Yeah. It just sounds different, but it's the same words.
Sounds like a train to me.
Yeah. So no, what I do remember, though, so it wasn't so much inspiration in music, I think, as it was personally and in terms of personality. So what I remember thinking is, or feeling, rather, is here's this genius. It's very respected. he's respected because he's come there off the beaten path.
Right.
So he hasn't, they didn't want to respect him. He just made himself. He earned that respect. Because bebop was considered noise at the beginning. It wasn't real jazz, It's right. All the flat fifths and all that stuff. Or whatever it is that, So here's this genius, and he's human and irreverent. That's what I remember thinking. So I really did like that.
Right.
And I've liked that ever since, and you see that in lots of different things. It's just, it's not just provoking for shock value, just for the sake of...
Exactly, but it's just very like...
It's just, we're human, and we talk about these things, and hey, think about it.
It's just like, sort of that like brutal honesty sort of thing,
well,
where it's just unfiltered.
And the humor, and the not caring about whether some people could get their knickers in a bunch, so to speak, about a stupid anecdote, and how to deflate... I really liked, so I love the question because I really liked that this was a guy that was being treated like a Devo. And
Right.
he brought it right back down.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Like,
this is
putting him on a pedestal, and he's like, no, I'm just a regular guy.
He's just this.
Nothing special.
And he's like, hey, what do you do when you kneel down to lift a big wafer? Just think about it, You tighten up. I just love that. You tighten up your asshole. So, I just love that. And that really did inspire me. That I thought, this is... is something.
Yeah. Dizzy is definitely a big source of inspiration. Certainly one that I latched onto as a kid, among a couple other folks. I mean, just to name a few personally, it would be like Doc Severinsen. He's a big guy.
Was he jazz too, or I don't know him?
Did you ever watch the Tonight Show band? Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so he was the Doc Severinsen and the Tonight Show band. Like he was the director of that, and they did some just kill.
We're talking Johnny Carson. Sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, because this. All right. Because this pop culture I learned later.
But I mean, you did watch the Tonight Show though.
No, I didn't. That's what I'm saying. We didn't have that in Spain. So when I moved here, I watched episodes of the Tonight Show. I became interested in it later.
But it was just afterwards.
Yeah, so just watching YouTube interviews of people that I like, and then I watched Johnny with them.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of so Johnny Carson was nothing to me. Neither was Dave Letterman and Jay Leno for that matter.
That's
until
fair.
I moved to the States. So yeah.
But yeah, I mean, for anyone out there who is either has played trumpet, is playing trumpet now, if you don't know Doc Severinsen, that's a big one you got to go check out. But my other big source of inspiration, like aside from all the jazz stuff, I mean, it's still jazz adjacent, I would say, but it was Chris Botti. And so Chris Botti is another trumpet player who, when he plays, it's like the antithesis of all this like other like harsh high notes, really like makes your skin crawl with how good it is. He's just like this smooth, buttery thing that he does with his playing. Mm-hmm. And so I always, like, when I was growing up, so that's why I asked, like, was hearing that interview, like, if it influenced you at all, because that, if I had heard that at a young age, that would have just, like, fueled the fire even more for me.
How so?
Personally.
What exactly would have...
Well, because my parents were already playing trumpet, and so just hearing something like that, and like, oh, my stodgy teacher is like, it comes from your diaphragm, and this guy comes out and he's like, no, actually, just think about it, comes from your asshole. Like, well, all right. I mean, I like that a lot more. So it's just, that's where I was going with that one.
Right. Chris Botti, who's he? Sorry.
No. So he's like nobody get offended at me for saying this, but he's kind of like the Kenny G of trumpet players. Okay. For like smooth jazz sort of thing.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's just, he just does a really good job of just making it smooth and buttery and just really good job. So when I was ever in band growing up, like that was always my thing, was like, how do I take the smoothness of Chris Botti and combine it with like the power of Doc Severinsen, and then maybe trifecta that with like the notes and the punctuation of Dizzy.
Mm-hmm. So then, are we talking about tone?
Well, yeah. So that's a great question. Tone is a fantastic thing to consider with all of that, because without the power and everything, you can't have the tone. And the tone is something that actually, there's a story my dad told me one time when he was learning trumpet himself, and he'd always heard about like perfect tone, you gotta have perfect tone. And he's like, well, what does that even mean? Like, to have perfect tone, like just to be on pitch? No, it's not necessarily on pitch, but think of the sound as a shape, and like you just want this nice round experience. You know, you don't want like this block or triangle or whatever coming out of it. You want this nice round, full experience. And so that's what he was always told, like, that's perfect tone. But he never really understood it until one day he was at like a jazz concert outside, right? And I don't remember where this was. I don't remember the band he was saying, but I just remember him telling me the story that really stuck with me of how he was watching this trumpet player play, and because it was cold outside and you could see your breath, this guy was putting so much force and breath through his trumpet that you could see like the air, the steam or whatever, coming out of the end of his horn.
Wow.
And that's when my dad noticed that as he's watching this come out of his horn, there is actually a spiral that is happening because of the sound waves coming out. And it's this like perfect spiral coming out of the end, creating this cone of noise out of the end of the trumpet.
It's coming like almost like an animation.
Exactly.
Kind of
I mean, it was exactly like an animation.
Wow.
I mean, it's like, you know, if you were looking at it dead on, it would almost be like one of those hypnotizing like spiral things that's coming at you.
And who was this guy playing like that? Just a really good trumpet player?
I don't remember the player at this point.
Was he semi-famous, or was
he was very famous.
Oh, okay.
He was very well known.
Okay.
But that was the day that my dad told me, like, stuck with him, like, that's what perfect tone looks like.
Wow.
To like actually imagine it in your mind, that's what that is this perfect spiral, this cone of sound that just kind of comes out from the horn.
That's interesting because, like, in electric guitar for rock and roll, for example, tone is a little bit, in my opinion, is more of a subjective. It's a subjective value. It's more about the personality of your guitar tone.
Sure.
So when people talk about tone, it's, you know, does it? So I don't know. An example is Dan from the Black Keys.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's a guitar. His guitar tone is very well crafted, and he has different ones depending for. But you know, you listen to it and it just demands attention. But that's kind of subjective because it's not a perfect. You know, I mean, there's distortion involved.
Do you think that like the guitar tone, like tone for each one of these things, is it specific to the individual or specific to the guitar itself?
So that's a great.
Well, obviously how they match together. But.
That's a great question. It's actually how they match together. And I'm telling you this because I don't consider myself an expert there. I'm kind of curious. The concept of tone is elusive to me.
Right.
You've just explained it great for trumpet, by the way. But with guitar, it's elusive because people talk about, like,
yeah, it's a whole different.
That guy has a great tone, and you know, like half of it is not. You know, it's electronic, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a mixture of both. It's a mixture of. This is what I've gathered from people, you know, that I watch in interviews, and it's a mixture of the instrument, the amp and the settings of the amp, and maybe, you know, if you have pedals and things that are modulating your wave in different ways, and then it's the strings. The girth of the strings have a certain different tones.
Interesting. I didn't know that. Oh, yeah.
And then I'll give you an example in a second. And then the way the guitarist plays.
Okay.
So one of the things that I really, really love is I watched once Gary Moore. And I'm not exactly a fan of Gary Moore. I'm a huge fan of Thin Lizzy. But Gary's kind of, I like Gary as a person, but his own solo work is...
Sure, yeah, that makes sense.
You know, it's not, I think all that much...
A lot of people like the Beatles, but they don't like the Ringo Starr solo stuff. So
right, I love the Ringo Starr, so I don't like McCartney stuff, but I think he's really good. It's So, you know, Gary sometimes has like too long operatic stuff that I don't particularly subscribe to, but he has brilliant stuff too that I really like. But one thing that I love is I saw him once talking about a guitar. It was like a guitar shopping, you know, kind of guitar review by Gary Moore.
Sure.
Like, how do you pick a guitar? And he's holding this amazing Gibson Les Paul, if any of you play guitar. And the first thing he does is he goes like, this is the first thing I do. And he starts playing it unplugged.
Okay.
And then he just hits a chord and he stops. And he waits till the ring dies down.
Right.
Of the unplugged electric guitar. So this is like a pling, you know, pling, and then he goes, this is a good guitar. It has the sustain. So that's part of tone.
So he could tell that before plugging it in with an electric guitar. So it's not acoustic, so we're not getting like the fullness of the sound or anything, but just from like how it sounded just from plucking a string.
Correct.
Okay.
Because it's the combination of strings and the wood. If the wood is really good material, if the design body is really well built, and this is I've heard is a lot more important in the famous violins, the Stradivarius and all that, the flamenco guitars that you have to wait for the wood to age so that the notes carry around the wood a lot better, so it's not just
that, and even like sometimes the resin coating that goes around it to help preserve it, like everything. Even that can make a big difference too.
Everything, all the materials, everything. So there's that. There's the strings. They say that Stevie Ray Vaughan had used the third string of his guitar. He used a banjo string. Because it has
Does that make a big difference?
It has a deeper tone, but the thing is you have to have the fingers of the Incredible Hulk to bend that thing. Which he did. I mean, if you see a guitar on Stevie Ray...
trying to imagine the Incredible Hulk playing like this little tiny guitar, like... Pew, 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 pew.
Well, here's a different story. And don't let me ramble on about this, but here's an interesting story. So AC/DC, right?
Yeah.
So Angus Young, everybody's familiar with Angus Young, the crazy lead guitarist. Angus Young is a very petite guy. He's a very small guy. And he plays a Gibson SG, this Gibson guitar that was made for students. So it's a smaller, lighter built guitar. And Frank Zappa's famous son, Dweezil Zappa, who's an amazing guitarist, he also plays a Gibson SG, as did his father. He mentions one time how he wondered where Angus Young was getting these huge Gibson SGs until it dawned on him that he's just talking about a smaller framed guy. So the guitar looks a lot bigger on him.
Right.
So Stevie Ray, if you look at him, a pretty big Fender Stratocaster, it doesn't look that big on him, and he's got a big strong hand. So that gives him an extra tone, but of course, it's a string that's more like almost like a metal wire, like a thick metal wire.
Yeah.
So it's a lot girthier, and then there's people like Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top famously has very, very light gauge.
Right.
So he could just bend all the way out of the, but he compensates that because that has a lot less tone. He compensates that, I guess, with electronics and with the way he plays.
So is tone then for guitar different from style, like the style that someone plays?
I think so, but it's the personality of how your sound is, I guess is what I'm saying, versus the perfection of how you hit notes, which is what you were saying.
Right. So
I think does it have personality? When you listen to a guitar...
Yeah, for a brass instrument, it really is about like that.
Right.
Like the force that you put into it.
Right.
As opposed to, it sounds like with the guitar, like it's more personality mixed with a slew of other things.
Well,
obviously, like with the trumpet, there's still it matters.
I was going to say,
like trumpet and like the material it's made out of and all of that.
If you have like a crappy trumpet, you're going to get worse tone.
Right. And
I guess with electric guitars, the materials play in so much. Well, and with guitar or piano, if you have a crappy piano, tone goes out the window. If you have a really good, the famous Steinway grand, the Steinway grands, or the Petrovs, you just like hit a note and then you can just walk away and the note's still ringing while you're going to the car, that kind of stuff. So that plays in a lot. But I can see that where the more acoustic the instrument, the more it pivots on how the musician plays.
Right.
But you still can't, it's a combo of both.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. Do you think that somebody playing guitar or any instrument really, when they're seeing like sort of the predecessors that came before them and they're trying to like build off of stuff and they go, oh, that's inspiration. What do you think it takes for them to now say, I really like what they do, but I want to make it my own thing and like draw from that inspiration? Like, do you think that serves a big purpose? Like in all of this, like trying to make your own noise or your own way that you do it by drawing inspiration from like those that came before you, even those that are around you like right now?
I mean, I think it's impossible not to draw inspiration from your surroundings, right?
Right.
I mean, everybody that is an artist, I think, draws from somewhere. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think... I think we've heard this in other things, not just in art, but, you find uniqueness when you practice a lot.
Right.
So at first you learn from the greats. I mean, I guess that's...
Well, you sort of like find something you like and go, I want to do that, so you imitate it, right?
Right. You
and
have
try
to
to get it as
somewhere.
close as possible. Exactly.
Yeah. And then over time, you kind of, it's like, I don't know, I think I heard somewhere that Elvis Presley was modeling himself after Dean Martin at first.
Really?
You know, but he was doing bluesy stuff, so of course,
Yeah.
And he was really good at it. And then he developed this other stuff. I don't know, another example, Thin Lizzy. You familiar with Thin Lizzy?
I am, yeah.
Metal band from Ireland. They started, trying to sound like Hendrix.
Really?
Yeah, and if you just listen to the first stuff, and actually Phil Lynott kind of looks a little bit like him.
Okay, so just the very beginning of Thin Lizzy, like if you go back and listen to it.
Yeah.
Okay.
They're a trio. Sorry, they're a trio at first. The first guitars that they had played with wah-wah. Yeah. They're trying to do all these like Hendrixy stuff, and then over time, they just developed this other like harmony guitars that sound like bagpipes, and they incorporated the Celtic stuff. Mm-hmm. Their first big hit was Whiskey in the Jar, and they didn't want to do that.
Oh man, Whiskey in the Jar. That is such a good song.
They did not want to do it because to them it's like the pop song that everybody does in Ireland. They're Irish and they're trying to be rockers in the 70s, so they're just messing around in the studio. And one of the producers hears them and goes like, "Let's," and they're like, "Are you kidding?" They're like, "No, seriously, give this a shot." And then they hit the charts.
That producer was absolutely right, and it's still played as a pop song to this day, every St. Patrick's Day.
But before
every bar.
What, the Thin Lizzy one?
Well, maybe not the Thin Lizzy version, but that's what
song.
I'm
saying. It's a really popular song. So Thin Lizzy wanted to be rockers. They wanted to break away.
Yeah.
So doing Whiskey in the Jar for them was like, what?
Right.
But because they could do it so well, because they're so familiar with it, they were like, in the key of rock, they were the first ones to do that.
Okay, interesting.
So that's kind of what they were just. It wasn't the key of rock. They were just playing with the electric guitars and the drum set.
Well, yeah, as opposed to like the traditional instruments.
And so they just started doing it in the studio because they were bored during the rehearsal. And this producer, I think, came down with like, "Guys, we have to cut this," and they were like, "No, we don't." And they says, "Well, just give it a shot." And that's when they hit it. And they had been, I think they were going to get fired from their label.
Really?
Because they weren't getting there. They were not hitting the charts or something like that. So,
right.
Thin Lizzy.
That's really interesting. Yeah, just that whole concept of like drawing inspiration from the stuff that comes before you, or all of that, like that really just hits home with me, and actually kind of ties things together from what we were talking about when we first started today. It was like that whole human connection thing of like trying to bring it all full circle of how people kind of work together, and that even extends beyond the interactions we have on a daily basis. It's the impression that you leave behind based on your actions. And so seeing that is really cool. Like I always wonder, like talking about Dizzy, what was Dizzy but influenced by? Like what were the big things for Dizzy to like go out and look through as he was coming up and be like, that is something that I really appreciate, or I can go with that.
I watched this famous documentary that Ken Burns, a famous documentary.
Oh, Ken Burns, yeah.
So he had a series he did like, I don't know, 10 years ago called Jazz. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Because I wasn't that hip to jazz. I kind of liked it, but I didn't know all that much. And then I just watched the whole series. I loved it. And they were talking about how Dizzy Gillespie had been, because he was like kind of ahead of his time, and he introduced bebop, which was kind of a revolution within jazz.
Oh, yeah.
Because it was weird jazz back then, it was like hip jazz or whatever.
Yeah.
And he had been always like making fun of Louis Armstrong and kind of like rejecting all the previous
making fun of Louis.
Dude, it's on YouTube. You can. I think there's some clips out there.
I got some research to do.
You should watch it. He's actually He's actually playing like him and kind of acting, and he does like a whole handkerchief thing, and he just scratches. Dizzy was really funny.
Did he do the voice too?
Yeah. He's really funny. Yeah, he is. Yeah, it's very clear. That kind. And then he does the trumpet like him too, which is great. And he kind of made fun of him. It's like I don't know. It's I don't know how bad he attacked it, but I had, in the documentary they talked about he rejects him quite a bit.
Right.
And he rejects all that kind of what he considers maybe submissive jazz to the, to the almost Uncle Tom-ish type of jazz kind of thing. I think it kind of goes in that direction. Yeah. And then at the end of his life, he just came back around. I guess you get wiser when you get older. And he mentioned something I really like. He said, "No him, no me."
Really?
So he gave him props at the end. After all, then yeah, and it's true. I mean, like, where do you think Dizzy would have come up with something if Shatmo wouldn't have taken jazz? Where
that's the reason I ask, is because that's a great example of like we build off of each other, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just this whole legacy thing of like, human association and this connection, it goes beyond the day-to-day stuff. I know that's the easiest one to compare it to, but really trying to like take it all home, it's this whole legacy of just human creativity and creation, and like the legacy we leave behind for other people to see. And that's truly like how we sort of like help each other and build each other up.
But I love also you're right, but I love also the refreshing part of every generation kind of has to break a little bit with. So
of course.
There's still...
They don't want to just completely retread it. Like, it has to be different.
It has to be renovated, right? But but they're still, like, drawing from it. So that's what I like about the Dizzy sentences. At the end, he admits, he says, absolutely, I drew from what this guy built. Yeah. But I had to twist it around, you know?
I like that. So I actually think that's a really good note to kind of close on. Know him, know me. And just sort of... what does that mean for all of us? But, yeah.